Hello, today I'm going to be talking about the article Unstable Space Mapping the Antarctic for Children in Heroic Era Antarctic Literature. This article was written by Dr. Sinyad Moriarty and it was published in the Journal of Children's Literature and Education in 2017. So, Dr. Moriarty is a professor of children's literature at Trinity College in Dublin. She writes a lot about landscape and wilderness in children's literature, particularly the Antarctic. She also writes about heroism, masculinity, and imperialism in children's literature. So this particular article examines children's literature written about expeditions of the heroic age in Antarctica. These are the 6 books focused on in this article. It's Trapped by the Ice, Shackleton's Amazing Antarctic Adventure by Michael McCurdy, Shackleton the Survivor by Christine Butterworth, Race to the Pole by Meredith Hooper, Scott of the Antarctic by Dowdeswell and Seton, Great Ice Race by Hayden Middleton, and Shackleton's Journey by William Grill. These books were all written on the heroic era. The heroic era is the period between the 6th International Geographical Congress in 1895 and the death of Ernest Shackleton in 1922. This Congress inspired a period of exploration in Antarctica, and this was categorized by expeditions led by explorers Amundsen, Scott, and Shackleton, and they were all racing to be the first to reach the South Pole. So the thesis of this article put forth by Dr. Moriarty, she states that maps often restrict the Antarctic, misrepresenting it as a static space. The second main point that she makes in her article is that these maps have been used to impose a nationalistic vision of the history of polar exploration on the child reader, notably underplaying the significance and achievements of Amundsen in Race to the Pole. So these 2 maps are examples used by Dr. Moriarty to exemplify some not so great usage of maps in Antarctic children's literature. Antarctica is a constantly shifting landscape due to its constant melting and refreezing. Moriarty states that there is an inherent redundancy in trying to map a space that is so fluent and dynamic. The maps in these books map the movement of people, of the explorers, but they try to represent the space as static, which it just isn't. And the movement of the ice is actually important in the books, and it just is not represented in the maps most of the time. So this map on the right is from the book Shackleton the Survivor by Christine Butterworth. Moriarty points out several things about this map that are misleading. One of which is the color used in the map. For example, this area over here is represented in green. It's kind of hard to see on the slideshow because the background is so green, but like in the article, it's very, very green. And it's misleading because this area is likely also completely covered in ice. It's probably not actually green. This map has very clear borders of Antarctica, and these borders in real life aren't super clear like this. They're constantly shifting. This map, as well as this map over here, are very scientific looking, and they look very objective to the reader. This map on the left is from Race to the Pole by Meredith Hooper. And some things to point out in this map is that it uses latitude and longitude lines. There's very heavy box frames around it. And like the one on the right, it seems to be very scientific and objective. And it seems to be this factual thing that exists outside of the writing. And it's not displayed as part of the creative as part of the creative work. It's not, it doesn't read as subjective like it should. So a point made by Moriarty about these maps is that, and this is a direct quote from the article, maps like these imaginatively halt the movement that is a defining characteristic of the landscape. So in contrast, here next is a map that Moriarty deems as a bit better than the other ones, a lot better than the other ones. This is from the book Shackleton's Journey by William Grill. And this map is purposely simplistic, and it's obviously subjective. It's obviously not objective scientific material. You know, it looks like it was drawn in colored pencil, not like made on a computer. It's playful, it's roughly drawn. It's not only are the edges of Antarctica itself roughly drawn, but the edges, like the border of the map itself, is roughly drawn. It's not that like thick box like in the last map. Another thing to point out is that this map is drawn in the same style as the other illustrations in the book, which is important because it shows it as being part of their creative work, not outside of it. So something else that Moriarty points out, this is her second main point in the article, is that maps like these contribute to ideological mapping. So something that she says is that none of the maps across the 6 books, none of the 6 maps stipulate what point in time the map represents. You know, they're not labeled as representing Antarctica as it was in 1910 or as it was in 1914. And so it reads as this is what Antarctica is. Antarctica is presented as this landscape that's like frozen in time. And what this does is it ignores any previous or succeeding Antarctic history. It shows the Antarctic as just, you know, it doesn't show it as this is what it was in 1910. It shows us as this is what it was in 1910 on the expedition, and this might be what it is now. You know, it doesn't mention that. Something else to point out is that, and I'm just going to be using one of the examples that she said in the article. There were a lot of different examples of the same type of thing, but this map on the right from Shackleton the Survivor uses exclusively British names, and it really ignores a lot of the Norwegian names that are there or that would have been used. For example, there is a sea that's on this map, but it's not labeled. It's called the King Haakon the Seventh Sea, and this was named by Amundsen the explorer, and it was named after the Norwegian king, but it was not put on the map. The only names that are on this map are British. And so it's interesting to note the choices of the author in what language is used in there and what message that conveys, you know. So something that I'd like to point out is that many of these maps were oversimplified by the author due to the assumption that the child would not be able to understand a more complex map or understand a more subjective map. And usually that oversimplification is due to a lack of respect for the child reader. So often the lack of respect for the child reader leads to a misleading map, which is, you know, unfortunate. So in kind of tying this all back to class discussions, I wanted to compare this map from Shackleton's Journey by William Grill to the map in 3 Times Lucky. Both of these maps are very playful and they're very purposely simplistic. They're obviously not some scientific map that's meant to be followed. You know, this map from 3 Times Lucky by Sheila Turnage is a map that was just drawn by Mo in her notebook. And neither of these maps utilize things like latitude or longitude. They really fit in with the style of the rest of the text. And the ability to follow the map in real life is not what matters. It's not the purpose. Um, with this map from Shackleton's Journey, you just can't create a map of what it looked like in 1910 that you would be able, that like the reader would be able to pick up and follow now, because obviously like it's changed so much. It's Antarctica. It's constantly melting and freezing. That's not the purpose of it. And with Three Times Lucky, the purpose of this is not to be able to pick up this map and then travel to this town and be able to follow it around. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose is to show where things that are important to Mo are in relation to each other, and really to like show the things that are important to the story and where they are in relation to each other. The purpose of these maps is to supplement the written text by aiding the reader's spatial understanding. Objectivity in these two is completely useless for these purposes. Not only that, but it would be misleading. So I think it's really interesting to tie that map from Three Times Lucky into this map, which Dr. Moriarty would deem as a much better example of map usage in children's literature. And I think it's just really interesting to see the ways that maps can be used well in children's literature and the ways that they can be used not so great. And, not only do they not represent the actual geographical layout, but they kind of do a disservice to the reader by assuming that, they're not able to handle that. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation.